3 years, 8 episodes, one indie animation series that changed everything. And of course, one more video to make. That's right, with the release of the Murder Drones finale, our favorite funny robot show has officially been brought to a close. Now that it has, it's finally time for me to bring my journey with this series full circle. Oh, wait, you thought this was a theory video? Nuh-uh, Buster. This right here is a review video, not just for episode 8, but for the entire series. So anyways, what's up my guys and gals, it's your boy Tyromaniac, back with another smoking hot video, and today I'm talking about Murder Drones. One last time. Obligatory go watch Murder Drone spiel, you know the deal at this point. One thing will be different from every other time I've said that though, in that I'm actually going to give you guys an episode recap for once. Only episode 8 though, I already made an entire video explaining the mental zip bomb that is this series lore. Shameless plug aside, the episode starts with Uzi in space having a heart-to-heart with Nori, at least until N pulls up in a dropship to rescue her. Cut to Jay, who's mysteriously lacking her own dropship, and it turns out that she's actually been working with Sin the whole time. Dick move, right? Well, apparently V thinks so too, and she's so pissed about it that she rode a Sentinel all the way into orbit just to fight over it. Then there's Sin herself, who's sick and tired of keeping track of all the different plot threads in this series, so she decides to simplify everything by blowing it all up. From there, the entire rest of the episode is basically just a continuous fight scene, with N, V, and Uzi trying to stop Sin and Jay from destroying the universe. Hijinks ensue, Jay fake dies for like the 4th time, and Sin is eventually defeated by the power of Uzi swallowing a black hole. After all of that, the series ends the same way it began, with Uzi giving a weird presentation and then threatening to kill all of her classmates. If any of that confused you, then might I suggest that you go watch No, we're not doing that anymore. Right then, on with the review. Well, let's start by addressing the obvious. The entire episode is basically just a 20-minute fight scene. And I couldn't be happier about it. The action has always been one of my favorite aspects of the show, so you know I'm not going to complain about getting more of it. It also helps that the animation here is probably some of the smoothest, most polished, and overall most beautiful we've gotten in the entire series. Even compared against the other well-animated episodes like 3 and 7, it still stands out due to both how long and how hard they lean into it. Like I said, 20-minute fight scene. However, with the animation being shown off so prominently, it kinda highlighted something that's been gradually creeping in episode by episode. I've heard the opinion that the overall visual style almost feels more like the Amazing Digital Circus than Murder Drones, which honestly I kinda see. It does definitely carry more of that cartoonish style than older episodes did, but at the same time it's the same group of people working on both shows, so what can you really expect? Either way, cartoony or not, it doesn't change the fact that it looks amazing. There are so many little moments that go insanely hard for no reason, whether by being creepy and unsettling, or just downright cool, and I absolutely love it. Of course, you can't have an entire episode, let alone an entire finale, prop itself up on visuals alone. So then, let's talk about the writing. First off, the humor. The horror comedy balance is something that I always pay attention to when it comes to this show, and the finale is no exception. There's definitely a good share of tense or serious moments that are left alone to actually, be tense or serious. Most of them are thanks to Sin, especially her nearly killing off N and Uzi right out the gate. That might be one of the best scenes in the entire series. On the other side of the spectrum, this might also be one of the few times where I say that a good chunk of the jokes in an episode actually landed. The Sentinel having this eternal on-site beef with Lizzie, and the absolute disrespect towards Doll are probably some of the funniest we've gotten in a while. That said, while there are great moments of both horror and comedy individually, the overlap is where we start running into problems. For every bag secured, there is an equal and opposite bag fumbled, and I think the perfect example is V coming out of fucking nowhere to ride a Sentinel into battle. The same Sentinel that tried to kill her, no less. Did I get a kick out of it? Oh yeah. Was it peak cinema? You bet your absolute solver. Did it single-handedly nuke my ability to take this show seriously? Kinda. And unfortunately, it wasn't the only moment like it, to the point where the overall tone of the episode almost feels downright goofy. It's one of my two biggest issues with the episode, and the other is only a tad worse. There's no plot. Yeah, when I said the episode is a 20-minute fight scene, that's pretty much all it is. For this being the series finale, the only closure we really get is just Sin being defeated and the day being saved. Outside of that, we don't really get anything as far as character arcs go, or any of the loose ends still floating around in the lore. To be entirely fair, I don't think it's physically possible to both have a satisfying final fight scene and give proper send-offs to like half a dozen characters in only 20 minutes. It also didn't really help that for a show called Murder Drones, the finale is surprisingly lacking in the murder department. All we get is the generic happily ever after ending with everyone riding off into the classroom. Don't get me wrong, I really like that scene. It's a nice way of bringing the story full circle and tying it back into the pilot. Still though, for a show like Murder Drones, it almost feels out of place, more like it's a work of fanfiction rather than the official canon ending. Although to be fair, I think that tone kinda works. It also raises more questions than it answers, which leads us to an entirely separate issue. So little about the story is actually explained in the episode as a whole, and the explanations we do get just feel rushed or glossed over. For that, I think Jay serves as the perfect example. Her being on Sin's side from the start admittedly could have made some pretty good sense. Maybe Tessa's death broke her so much emotionally that she didn't see a point in fighting back and just submitted to Sin out of despair. Maybe Sin's position as her administrator meant that she could influence Jay's very thoughts and opinions to make her want to join her side. So many cool and interesting ideas that could have been explored and that would have made it all make sense, and yet we didn't get any of them. As it stands, it just feels like Jay forgot all about her relationship with Tessa and teamed up with Sin to save her own ass. Not only does that feel out of character for her, but I don't even think it's what Glitch or Liam Vickers that is, intended for us to take away from it. Either way, that's pretty much it for my individual thoughts on the finale, but what do I think overall? Well, there's no shortage of issues. In terms of the writing and the story, it feels rushed and barely explains anything, with a tone that leans a little too far into silliness for its own good. On the other hand, it delivers some of the best action in the entire series supported by the best animation, along with some pretty good individual moments of both horror and comedy. It even wraps things up in a nice little bow with an ending that, although it does feel a little shallow and unsatisfying, at least serves as a nice send-off to bring the story full circle. Now, if I had to rate this episode objectively, then I would probably take everything I just said to call it mid and leave it at that. Yeah, fuck that. We don't do objective here. We're real men. We don't care about how good something is. We just care about how many happy chemicals it releases in our silky smooth brains. When we look at it from that angle, then things suddenly get a whole lot better. I'll admit that I ended up ranting more about the negatives than the positives, but those positives happen to be the things that matter the most for me personally, while most of the negatives are things that I don't really notice unless I actually sit down and think about it. A 20-minute fight scene with decent humor and visuals that go hard as shit is almost impossible not to love, despite the many flaws. So for that, I'm going to be calling Murder Drones Episode 8 Absolute End a beautifully entertaining mess, and the perfect way of ending off the series. Speaking of which, don't go thinking that we're done just yet. Sure, that might be the end of my thoughts on Episode 8 specifically, but we've still got that entire series to cover. So then, let's get into that, shall we? Oh yeah, bet you weren't expecting me to drop the retrospective like a month after the series ends, were ya? Right, so the first and most obvious thing to talk about is, once again, the visuals. Everything, from the establishing shots to the animation to the character designs, everything was just beautiful. Admittedly, they did start from pretty humble origins in the pilot, where things were definitely a bit rougher around the edges. By the time we got to episode 8, though, things had long since smoothed themselves out. I mean, literally. Everything was so much smoother and more polished, it was hard not to notice. Easily the biggest jump in quality happened around episode 2, with the entire show practically rebuilding its visual style from the ground up. To be fair though, they had a whole 13 months to do it, so I'd be more surprised if there wasn't some level of improvement. Either way, the animation and the character designs specifically were probably the two things that saw the biggest glow up, basically being completely overhauled like I said earlier. The fight scenes in episodes 7 and 8 easily had some of the best animation, carrying this energy and intensity that you almost can't help but love. On the other hand, I think that Tessin, Sin and Tessa's skin, had one of, if not the best character designs by far. Her being an eldritch robotic abomination wrapped in the skin of a dead child does so much to make her feel more intimidating, and it also kind of fits with the idea of the Absolute Solver being a biomechanical horror. Switching gears a little, the backgrounds and the establishing shots were already damn near perfect in my opinion, so they kinda just rode out the series on that consistent high, and maybe a new coat of paint. The pilot specifically had some of the best establishing shots and atmosphere in the entire series, basically carrying the tone of the episode. They did so much to reinforce the idea of murder drones being set in some sort of post-apocalyptic universe that it almost wouldn't be the same show without them. Anyways, I know I've been focusing a lot on the visuals so far, but honestly the entire show was just beautifully put together overall. The impact that the music and the voice acting had cannot be ignored, especially with heavy hitters like Michael Kovac and Elsie Lovelock voicing main characters, and AJ DeSpirito on the soundtrack. You'd think the same would be true about having an experienced writer like Liam Vickers handling the story, but... well, let's get into that. You see, Murder Drones as a show likes to call itself a horror comedy, which isn't wrong by any means. Well, okay, maybe it kind of is, but only because they left a few things out. In reality, Murder Drones is actually a horror, comedy, action, mystery, romance, you get the point. They spent so long trying to juggle so many different themes at once that they basically set themselves up for failure. I don't think it's controversial to say that each of those categories is handled pretty well individually. I've already rambled on enough about the action. There are plenty of great moments of both horror and comedy sprinkled throughout, and the romance... okay, well maybe not all of them. The point is, bringing those categories together is where the real problems start. Remember earlier when I brought up the horror-comedy balance? That's pretty much what I'm talking about, and that the series as a whole ends up being dragged down by the conflicting tones in any given episode. Trying to do too many things at once should really just be the official Murder Drones tagline, and I can't think of a better example than the plot. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved digging through every frame of this show looking for any clues I could get about the deeper lore, and I think my video catalog proves it. With that said, I can also recognize that it's a bit of a problem when that's the only way for people to understand the story you're trying to tell. I know a lot of casual viewers who had no idea what was going on up to the finale, and, like I talked about earlier, the finale probably wouldn't have helped with that. Easily the biggest issue with the writing, and with the show in general, was that it tried to take things way too fast. So many different plot points were introduced throughout the series that either never went anywhere, or were just too rushed to properly flesh themselves out. That applies to what I just said about the lore, but it also applies to the characters too. Think about how many of the side characters had arcs that were set up early on, and then think about how many of them weren't rushed into the ground or written out of existence. Khan technically became a better father, and Dahl technically almost got revenge on V, but neither of them really mattered by the time they got there. Then there's Thad, who was only important in like 2 episodes, and Jay. It's not even like this is just a side character thing either. Look at the main characters. N spent the whole series being Uzi's lapdog, Uzi never really changed past being a little gremlin, and V was barely a main character come to think of it. To be entirely fair to both Glitch and Liam, we can pin some of the blame on behind the scenes issues. We know that there were rewrites for both episodes 2 and 6, so that helps to explain away some of the pacing issues, but that's still just a small part of it. The real issue here is that there just wasn't enough time in the series for everything they had planned out, and the easiest fix for that would have just been to add another episode or 2. We already have fan projects like Murder Drone's Intermission that prove it, while also being universally praised for plugging the gap between episodes 4 and 5. Now with all that said, I do want to make it clear that despite all the criticism I've given it, I do actually enjoy the story of this series. The Murder Drones and the Absolute Solver are both such cool and interesting concepts, and I've been genuinely engaged in the plotline since the pilot. There's also very few times, like countable on one hand, that I've been disappointed by the direction they've taken it. Anyways, while I could go on and on about the writing, you really can't talk about Murder Drones without talking about the impact it had. When the pilot episode dropped, there really wasn't anything else like it. a 3D animated series produced by an indie studio uploaded to YouTube for anyone to watch for free no less. All we really had before that was Metarunner and Hazbin Hotel, except Hazbin sold its soul to Amazon, and Metarunner... Well, let's be honest, when's the last time you thought about Metarunner? How many of you have even heard of Metarunner? In that way, you can almost credit Murder Drones with setting the stage for the so-called indie animation renaissance. It might not be the first or the most popular, but it had just enough of both that it sort of warmed the YouTube audience to the idea of indie animation. I know for me personally that I probably would have never given projects like The Amazing Digital Circus, Ungazelig, Lackadaisy, Ramshackle, or Hazbin a chance if I didn't have Murder Drones as my launching point, and I'd bet there's a fair amount of people who feel the same way. That's not to say that they wouldn't have existed, or that they wouldn't have been popular, I just think it played a part in how well they were received. Well, okay, maybe not Hazbin because, Amazon, but my point still stands. With that, I think I've said just about everything I can think of for the funny robot show. So then, time to wrap it all up. Again. Let's just get this right out of the way. Murder Drones is by no means a masterclass in quality writing. The story was rushed and confusing, each episode packed enough tonal whiplash to snap your fucking neck, and the characters were just fumbled bag after fumbled bag. So yeah, if you're looking for some work of art where every minute detail was written to perfection, then you picked the wrong show. However, I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of Murder Drones fans, myself included, couldn't care less. When a show promises me badass robots murdering each other in a post-apocalyptic universe, I'm not exactly going to be on the lookout for quality writing. What I'm going to want is to turn my brain off and let myself be entertained by the cool stuff happening on screen. If the visuals are beautiful, the character designs go hard, the animation has me at the edge of my seat, and the mystery has me engaged to the very end, then I'd say the show is doing its job. So yeah, I guess it was alright. Alright, enough with the glazing. Something just doesn't sit right with me ending the video there, so instead, I'm gonna end it like this. Yup, you read that right. I'm gonna be ranking each and every episode from worst to best, based on my own personal preference, of course. If you disagree with any of my rankings, then, skill issue, I guess? Cope harder? Also, important side note, there aren't any episodes that I actively dislike, I just like some a lot more than others. So then, let's begin, shall we? Starting in last place, we have episode 5, Home. This was pretty much where the lore hit a fever pitch, when we were diving in the deepest and finding the most questions, and honestly, I loved it. Unfortunately, my opinion on the episode overall gets absolutely nuked by one minor detail: the humor. So many genuinely tense moments that could have brought the horror aspect of this series to new heights, and yet every single one of them was cut short by some random attempt at a joke. I know I said this was an issue with the series as a whole, but this episode in particular really felt like it was trying to single-handedly carry the average. V being corrupted, the V versus J fight, the basement reveal, the Gala massacre. You can only take so much before the missed potential just pisses you off. So yeah, last place. In 7th place, we have episode 6, Dead End. I will say that it had a few good moments of horror, and I did think that the Sentinels were a cool idea in a vacuum, but neither of those really did it for me. The horror never really went anywhere past some quick background gore or shock value. The Sentinels just felt kinda goofy and out of place given what the rest of the show is like, and honestly, I had no idea what to think of Alice. Maybe it's just because I hate the kidnapped by psychos plotline and stories, but I didn't really like her that much. Another thing I will add is that this episode was kind of the turning point in the lore where we started getting more answers than questions, so I did appreciate that. Unfortunately, that's not enough to save it from the bottom. In 6th place, and it really pains me to do this, we have episode 2, Heartbeat. I loved this episode when it first dropped, but man did it just fall behind as the series went on. I do have to give it credit for being the first episode to really dive into the horror aspect of the show, and the deep lore that this series is known for, but there really isn't much else aside from that. I mean, I could also give it credit for having the biggest jump in animation/visual quality in the entire series, but each episode afterwards only gets better and better anyways, so yeah. There's nothing bad about it per se, there's just nothing that really helps it stand out either. In 5th place, we've got episode 3, The Promining. Prom episode. Okay, but seriously though, this episode was carried by the prom fight. The animation and the music were both beautiful, and it was the first major fight scene we had gotten since the pilot. We wouldn't really see anything like it again until episode 7 either, so it was definitely nice to have. I will also say that Doll was a badass antagonist for this episode. Her powers were cool, her personality stood out from the rest of the cast, and she actually had decent, well-defined motives. If you were able to figure them out, at least. The only real issue I have is that it felt like they should have given her more build-up before her big payoff, but oh well. Alright, you guys are either gonna love me or crucify me for this, but in 4th place we have Episode 8, Absolute End. Beautiful fight scene, peak cinema in almost every way, but man are there some issues under the hood holding it back. The entire episode just feels too unserious, almost goofy considering what came before. Not to mention the fact that it barely explains anything, and overall just leaves too many unanswered questions to feel like a proper finale. 20 minutes really isn't enough to wrap everything up, and boy can you feel it. That said, positives outweigh the negatives, yada yada, you watch the first 10 minutes of this video, you get it. Moving on. In 3rd place, we've got Episode 4, Cabin Fever. This episode single-handedly cured my burnout when it first dropped. Anything even tangentially related to Solver Uzi goes hard as shit. From her design, to the build-up for the reveal itself, and especially the soundtrack. Not to mention that this was the episode where the lore really started to take that dive, finally setting up the plot points that would carry through to the end. It was also the episode where I finally started paying attention to the lore, so, you know. Oh, and it also sort of pivoted back to the pilot in terms of the tone and the atmosphere with the horror and the establishing shots and whatnot, so there's that. In 2nd place, we've got Episode 7, Mass Destruction. Just like Episode 4, this one was the breath of fresh air that got me reinvested in the series after like 7 months of nothing, and the 2 prior episodes that, well, I already talked about those. Peak animation. The fight scene with En and Nori versus Possessed Uzi, chef's fucking kiss. It was perfect. Like I said earlier, we hadn't really gotten anything like that since Episode 3, and man was it worth the wait. Oh, and the horror I praised other episodes for? Yeah, this one went into it the hardest, and to great effect I might add. Don't even get me started on the Tessin reveal, because I could talk about that for hours. Great character design, excellent way of elevating Sin as an antagonist, and overall, it just went so unimaginably hard. I hated the Tessa as Sin theory, but after seeing the way they did it, I fell in love almost instantly. Of course, if we're talking about things that go hard, then there's one more episode we have to talk about. Yeah, that's right. In 1st place, we've got none other than the first episode, Episode 1, Pilot. What can I say? It was my first exposure to the series, and man did I get addicted. I think me from 2.5 years ago said it best. It's been a while since I've seen a single episode of a show that kept me up at night thinking, if there's one thing I need more of in my life right now, it's this. It easily had the best pacing of any episode, actually being able to juggle good character moments and good action. As for the tone and the atmosphere, it was immaculate. Those establishing shots did more to sell me on the idea of this show taking place in a post-apocalyptic universe than anything else in the series, even finding out that Earth had been blown up in Episode 6. Not to mention the way they actually made the murder drones look cool with the whole Angel of Death vibes. It was just... I'm ranting. I should probably stop. Alrighty then, what's left to do? Wait, really? Already? Wow, okay then. So yeah, that was it. My final video about murder drones. Ever. Well then, I hope you guys enjoyed my episode 8 review, plus general series review, plus surprise episode ranking at the end there. I really don't know what else to say. A series that I've been following for like 2.5 years. And now it's over. Just like that. No time to be sentimental. That gets pushed deep down inside until we forget that it's there. Just like everything else. So yeah, episode 8 was good, Murder Drones as a whole was good. If you haven't watched the series yet, so help me God, I will beat you over the head with a rusted out crowbar. And of course, that's it for this video, so remember to light up that like button, smoke that subscribe button, drop a big old comment, check out some of the videos on the left, and I will see you guys in the next video.